the License Seeker's Guide to Compliance today. It's a really exciting topic. Really, compliance is a huge bucket to work on, and I'm excited to kind of run through it here in the next few minutes with you. But what I'd like to start with is just a little bit about myself. So for 7 years, I worked in the brand space. I worked at an MSO based in Seattle. We had 3 brands. One of them, Mr. Moxie's, is a brand that we ended up taking into 5 adult use markets, 1 medical market, and then a hemp-derived CBD version of that brand made it nationally and internationally as well. So it's really exciting, but in that time, you learn a lot about compliance. Washington was one of the first 2 states to go adult use, and so really it's a crash course in understanding how to run a compliant business. And then today I run the logistics experience at Leaflink. So what I want to get into first is the introduction to compliance. So what does that entail? It's understanding and operating under all the rules and regulations that apply to you. And there will be a lot. I can tell you that from experience, and that's a big part of why it's, there's so much time and effort spent on developing these rules and regulations. So another piece is why should you care? Why should you care about compliance? I think for me, one of the things that's top of mind is when you get your license, you are entering the cannabis industry, right? It's been a long time coming. It's taken a lot of work. It's taking a lot of work now. And you need to help set best in industry standards for yourself and for the rest of the industry. Another kind of fundamental piece of this is you don't want to lose your license. It takes a lot to get a license, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, a lot of resources, a lot of time. And the last thing that you want to do is lose your license because you didn't update a floor plan or because you didn't sign in the right person when they came to visit your facility. These are small things, but they have a big impact in terms of compliance. So the compliance buckets that we're going to be talking about today are rules and regulations. We're going to be talking about traceability. We're going to be talking about facilities. We're going to be talking about processes, and then we're going to be talking about brands and products. So first, when it comes to rules and regulations, I think one of the really important things to understand is that there are going to be many regulations that you're being held to. And what you want to go out and do first is understand who is responsible for those rules. There's likely going to be, obviously, a cannabis entity that you have to follow those rules and regulations. There might be health and safety. There might be agricultural if you're on the grow side. Fire departments, municipal levels of government, county levels of government, state levels. All of that entails compliance. You and your team need to know what all of that requires. You also need to understand how you can contact the folks from all those different levels of regulation and enforcement. Is it something that you only go and speak with someone at a kind of public forum? Is it folks that you can get on the phone and talk through and get educating points on how to operate compliantly? That's really important in terms of communicating on how you remain compliant. And then you also need to understand who's advocating for the changes to those rules, for better or for worse, depending on where you are. Knowing who's coming in and speaking with the folks that deal with enforcement, for the people, the legislators that are writing the bills, knowing that lay of the land is going to be critical, and understanding how you can then also engage in that dialogue. And then I think the other thing that's of real importance is know the rules, right? If you have someone on your team dedicated on this, that's great. I recommend if you are a license holder, you should know what the requirements are. You should know what you're putting your name on when you go and sign up for a license. You should know all those rules because every aspect of compliance will determine how you operate and what you need to do to stay in compliance. And then this industry requires a really high level of engagement. It's incredibly important that you're able to go out into the world and speak with folks about compliance. I think one of the things that I've found in the years that I've been in the space is I've gone and chatted with legislators, I've gone and chatted with regulators, with enforcement officers, with other people in the space, with safety groups that are looking out for the best interests of children that want to make sure that potency on certain products isn't high or that packaging is not marketed to children. You need to know the entire lay of the land on who's invested on the rules and regulations in this space to help be a part of that conversation. I think it's really important to understand where those conversations are going. Are you being a part of that conversation? And because if you're not, it's going to happen without you, right? People are going to have those conversations whether or not you're in the room. So why not participate and be in the space? And And then education, 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 education. I think education has talked a lot in terms of educating consumers, but educate each other. Understand what best practices you can work with, because it's an industry. We're all in this together. I think the term "a rising tide lifts all boats" is thrown out a lot, but it's really true. And then educate the folks that are involved in enforcing and putting the rules and regulations in place for you. Right? If someone has a rule that is forcing you to package a product a very specific way, go and explain to them what the burden is and how it might be remedied. Next, I want to talk about traceability compliance. So I think a lot of folks are familiar with Metric. There is BioTrack. There's MJ Freeway. The reality is that these systems aren't perfect, but they have to be your source of truth, because that's what you're reporting back to the state. So I think something else that's really important on this is understanding the limitations of your platforms. They're not going to do everything for you. What they're meant to do is document the necessary information and serve it back to the state. So really use them in that capacity, and then understand where you need to expand additionally. So you need to find your enterprise resource planning platforms. You need to find platforms like Leaflink that you can integrate with to supplement those business processes. Traceability systems are only meant to help do what they're designed to do, which is track and trace from seed to sale everything that you're moving through. And then create checks and balances for the things that are high risk. Again, this is one of those things where the traceability systems can be relied on for so much, but for things that are super critical, things that are plant touching and plant facing, have a double step, have a backstop. Make sure that you're prepared in case someone comes in for an audit, that you have dual points of record should you need to rely on that. And then invest in training your team. I think it's both important to train them on the platform, but to understand the limitations of a platform, what it means for them to operate in the real world. So if a traceability system requires a certain level of detail and metric and recording, your team needs to know that when they go pull down a harvest, when they go package product for shipping, that those requirements carry forward into the digital space. Next, I want to talk about facility compliance. So, facilities, it's going to take a lot of time and effort and energy to get your facility prepped and ready to go for when you get your first inspection and then you're licensed. And then from that day forward, your facility has to be in compliance. So it's understanding what those requirements are and who you're responsible to. Are there fire code issues that you need to resolve and make sure that you're keeping an eye on? Really, from top to bottom, the facility has to be compliant. And again, those regulations are going to be coming from a lot of different places. I think the other important thing to take into account is, I think everyone wants to get in and you want to grow your business, right? Everyone has growth plans. That's just part of what this new industry is about. Understand how your growth plans will require an understanding and updating of your compliance plan, right? You need to know that if you want to build out more grow rooms, if you want to add a processing space, that's going to require floor plan reviews by the state. Maybe that's going to require an additional license. Understand where the two merge, and don't let compliance be your blocker to growth. And then leverage technology, right? There are a lot of great solutions out there to help with facility compliance. You have camera security solutions that are cloud-based that you can look up in real time on your phone. You have sign-in digital platforms that allow folks to come in, take a picture, fill it out, rather than have these kind of paper sheets. Wherever you can leverage technology to help keep your facility in compliance, it's less that you and your team have to take on their own. Next, I want to talk about process compliance. So visibility and accountability are really the two big things when it comes to process compliance. Any process that is cannabis related or cannabis adjacent should have a defined standard operating procedure, SOP. That's so that you and your team know exactly what's required and exactly what needs to happen. But if someone comes in, an enforcement officer, and they want to understand more about the process, it's a lot easier to show them the SOP and walk them through it than to kind of work through it or wing it on the fly. I think something else to understand is identify the processes that are the highest risk when it comes to compliance. So if there are certain areas that, by the nature of how it's being done, like transportation is one where there are vehicle requirements for how your vehicles are built out. There are driver requirements, there's information sharing requirements. Vans might have to be fitted with special cages on the interior. This is one example of something that you want to find, that's going to be an investment on your end if you want to be compliant in that space, or you can leverage an outside solution and essentially find a solution for your transportation needs. Leaflink has a solution like that, but I think the key part here is you don't have to do it all yourself. Find help for these areas, especially these high-risk areas. Next, I want to talk about brand and product compliance. So it doesn't go without saying, because I'm going to say it, if your products aren't compliant and your brand's not compliant, it's never going to get in front of consumers. So you really want to make sure that from day one, as you're thinking through what you want to go to market with, what you want to develop, what you want to grow, that it falls within what is compliant. So understand kind of how these compliance rules are going to affect everything from packaging to product to your branding. There's going to be a list of rules on what you can and cannot do, and you're going to have to operate within that space. So I think the big thing to do is understand where are the points that these rules could end up changing. In Washington State, specifically, somewhere I spent a lot of time, there were shifting rules when it came to what branding could look like on packaging. So you go and you make an investment, you buy 250,000 pieces of packaging, a new emergency rule passes, and now you can't use any of it. So really understand where these sort of processes are going. This is where engagement helps, because you can know, okay, regulators are looking at further developing rules in this space. I'm not going to quite make that packaging investment. And then I really think start with function over form. So find something that works, find something that's compliant, bring it to market, and then iterate. Figure out how you can bring in branding, bring in more special packaging. Again, you're not going to get on shelf if you don't have compliant product. And then consistency. So the biggest way to avoid compliance issues when it comes to your products is be consistent in what you produce. That comes down to dosing. That comes down to efficacy, right? If you have an issue where your products are constantly, especially edibles, which is what my background is, or coming in overdosed and are non-compliant, there's an issue there, and you have to solve for it. And if that product makes its way out to retail and enforcement officer finds it, that comes back to you as the manufacturer. So product consistency and quality is absolutely key in ensuring compliance. And then I again, want to kind of run through some of these key takeaways. So know the rules. Again, goes without saying, but really make sure that you understand, especially if your name's on the license, know what you're being held to account to. Stay engaged. There's a lot happening. Rules change. There are interest groups both within and outside the industry. Make sure that you know where the industry is moving and where the rules are going. Invest in training your team. This is a big one. It underlies everything you do. I know we've had some folks talk about hiring and how to build out your team. Make sure that they're trained. Make sure that they're equipped. When it comes to compliance, it could be the difference between you keeping and you losing your license. And then ensure that your growth plans take compliance into account. Don't limit yourself and your opportunities for your growth with what you hadn't thought about on how to build out an extra space, add additional cameras, something like that. And then document your processes. Make sure they're documented. You can always update them. They don't have to stay the same. But it's critical to have that point of record, both for yourself internally and for compliance documentation purposes. And then be adaptable. The industry is incredibly dynamic. Being in the space for 7 years, if that's the one thing I've learned, that's probably the biggest takeaway. So if you can go into the space, if you can be adaptable, I think success is going to be on your side. So that's compliance. There are a few other folks from Leaflink here. Come say hi to us. Feel free to give us a shout. We're happy to talk through. And thank you for your time.